moderator tonight, or at least I will be moderate. And we're all here because a production of Black Dragon Mountain that was scheduled to open tonight is not opening tonight. It's been canceled by the producer-director and the team in response to concerns expressed from members of the theater community and the Chinese community about cultural identity, cultural appropriation, and instead, we're here to have a discussion on those subjects. This night is brought to you by the team of Black Dragon Mountain. They are their sponsors and your hosts tonight. So, we have assembled a wonderful group of discussion leaders to help us navigate this interesting discussion. Allow me to briefly introduce everybody. We have Dr. Simon Koo, Associate Professor of Humanities in the Early Modern Studies program at University of King's College. He specializes in modern political theory and the history of Western views of Asia. Ivy Ho is a theater practitioner and publicist, a very important part of theater practice, and a practice, see you laugh. And publicity is, of course, a very important part of theater practice. And we are here to discuss a play in which the public responded to, in fact, publicity. Because nobody ever actually saw the play. Publicity is a very important aspect of how we represent plays and how we incorporate ideas of cultural identity. We have Cory Bowles, who is a dancer, choreographer, writer, director, actor. What did I miss? He's a brand. There you go. Pasha Ebrahimi, also an actor and writer. Vivien Chan is a student at Dalhousie University. Some of Vivien's eloquently stated concerns in social media that were brought to the attention of the creators of the show were an inspiration for not proceeding with the show, and go Viv. And Sharleen Kalayil is an actress, performer, and was actually involved in the production of Black Dragon Mountain. Roy Ellis is the playwright and creator of Black Dragon Mountain, and it was Roy's decision, with the support of the cast and crew, to cancel the production and have this night instead. Gord White is an actor, and Gord is here briefly because he's in rehearsal with the whole corner of people in the back of the room. This apparently is their lunch break today. So Gord will not be with us for the entire time, but he is here to begin. So I want to share with you the agenda. The agenda was arrived at with everybody up here on the stage invited to have input, and many of us did. So we're going to actually start tonight with a short backgrounder from Dr. Koo about the history of representation of Asian culture in the past and the Chinese-Canadian experience. This is really meant to provide some context for everybody to understand the concerns that were raised by Vivien and other members of the Chinese community, as well as members of the theater community, about how this play was proceeding. Gord's going to follow that up with a presentation briefly about the Nothing Without Us. I messed that up.
I messed it up too.
The Nothing About Us Without Us movement, which is a social movement that started in the disability community, but is also used in the visible minority communities to discuss ways in which permissions and collaborations can be sought when representing different communities in the arts. And then we're going to have some statements from Roy and Vivien, specifically about Black Dragon Mountain and the events that led up to the development, production, release of publicity materials and the concerns that it raised in the community. Now we're going to open it up to all of the people who are our discussion leaders tonight, and then to all of you. Now, a really important part of the night is to move the discussion away from the abstract and the academic. So around that time, we want to be able to talk about other local productions in which there have been struggles with regards to cultural appropriation and casting, and really move on to address ways that we can improve our cultural sensitivity in our creative day-to-day practices. I'm talking about writing, directing, designing, publicity, and of course casting, which I imagine is at the forefront of many people's minds tonight. Because I think that, you know, in all of those areas in our local theater practice, there's room for improvement. We are a fairly isolated province, and solutions that sometimes work in big centers and big cities are difficult to implement here. But I think at the end of tonight, hopefully, we will be able to have some ideas as a group to be able to proceed and make sure that these kinds of conflicts that we may have are improved across the board. So, Dr. Koo?
Do you prefer if I stand or sit?
Would you like Dr. Koo to stand or sit?
His voice might carry better if he stands.
Okay. Okay, so I will begin with the abstract and the academic, and then
Enough of that.
because I'm not as talented as the actors in this assembled in here, I do have some notes that I will be using. So I just want to say a few words on China and the Chinese people as seen by the West, and the question of cultural appropriation and misrepresentation in the arts in a sort of a general way, which I think reflect on our discussion tonight. So in general, the artistic depictions of China and Chinese people, as well as of other Asian cultures and peoples, not to mention those of African descent and so on in other parts of the world, are bound up and inevitably kind of tied in some ways to the history of overseas imperialism, colonialism, the history of racist immigration policies, popular beliefs in terms of racism, and also ideas of multiculturalism, which continues to be a contested and fluid term. So any Western attempt to portray Chinese culture and Chinese people, no matter how well-intentioned, inevitably touches on these historical and cultural contexts. So it's really important to keep those contexts in mind. So in terms of the history of kind of Western views of China, I mean, I'll start with the early 19th century, where you have the kind of Western imperialism in China in the form of the Opium Wars, and famously the Chinese lost the Opium Wars to the British, who kind of forced the opium also addiction onto the Chinese, who were forced to sign unequal treaties with major Western powers, and of course Hong Kong became a British colony. And so began the century of humiliation relative to the West. And this kind of idea of the century of humiliation continues to be very much present in the memories of people in China and also overseas Chinese to this day. And China was seen in the 19th century as the kind of sick man of Asia, enfeebled, opium-addicted, inferior to the West. And you see some of the kind of legacy of that clearly with the history of Chinese immigration to the West. So by the mid to late 19th centuries, you have waves of Chinese immigrants to the West, particularly because of the gold rush in California and in British Columbia. And the Chinese immigrants were seen as, perceived as taking jobs away, and there were many kind of perceptions of them as being unclean or diseased, as foreigners who could not be assimilated. And you see, this kind of language present today in the case of, for example, refugees from Syria. And the Chinatowns that grew up with the history of Chinese immigration in the West were thought to breed crime, squalor. They were depicted as slums containing opium dens, brothels, gambling parlors, and so on. So you have these kind of perceptions, deep-seated perceptions of Chinese and of other Asians as being weak. The Chinese and Japanese and other Asian people seen, for example, as being weak relative to the West, but also seen as a kind of yellow peril, right, with this threat of invading the West, and of course stories about worldwide conspiracies of Chinese, as you see in the stories about Fu Manchu. Now, by the late 19th century, you see the exclusion bills in places like the United States and Canada. So by the 1870s, there were a number of exclusion bills in the US meant to limit Chinese immigration. And of course, in Canada, famously, there was the head tax. So costly sums that were placed on those who would immigrate from China. This happened at least since 1885. In 1923, there was a full exclusion act in Canada, which excluded Chinese immigrants, as well as other kind of undesirable groups. And of course, the Chinese only had the right to citizenship in Canada in 1947 as a result of World War II and the fact that the war was fought against the Japanese, and the Chinese were the allies of the West in that regard. But we see lingering racism against the Chinese in subsequent decades after the war. And most recently, you can still see stories about, for example, so-called Asian universities. So a few years ago, the University of Toronto was described as an Asian university because there were too many Chinese people there. During the SARS crisis, there was a great deal of racism against Chinese. People wouldn't go to Chinese restaurants, and so on. On the flip side, we've also seen in recent decades a phenomenon of yellow fever, which is actually not quite new either, and a kind of pathological obsession with China and with Asia in general. So all of this kind of legacy, these historical legacies, are reflected in the arts and in the problem of cultural appropriation. So what do we mean by cultural appropriation? Well, particularly kind of appropriating or depicting aspects of a culture that's foreign to your own. And you see this in popular literature, in drama, in films. The stories of Fu Manchu, which were extremely popular in their time, in the late 19th, well, in the early 20th centuries. But even sympathetic portrayals of Chinese tended to be deeply questionable. So, for example, there's a film from 1919 called Broken Blossoms, which is based on a play called The Chink and the Child, where a white actor plays the very good Chinaman, and he saves this young girl in Chinatown, but the film has this kind of undercurrent of a fear of miscegenation, a fear of racial mixing. And you see this also in the Charlie Chan movies, which were very popular in the early 20th century, where a white actor, usually one, a Swedish or other actor, would play this fat Honolulu Chinese detective with broken English and kind of mock Confucian sayings. These were deeply popular. And we see this later in the century with stereotypes of Chinese as kung fu masters, and also kind of depictions of other Asian cultures as well. And this includes the kind of problem of yellowface. So this term yellowface, of course, refers to is a kind of East Asian counterpart to blackface. That is the minstrel tradition of painting black faces on white performers, depicting African Americans as kind of comic or ridiculous figures. And so questions are raised, with white actors playing Asian characters, whether this perpetrates that kind of yellowface. So we see these kind of problems of cultural appropriation, cultural depictions, which are distorted views of foreign cultures. I mean, I might note that it can also happen in the opposite direction, and there are some examples of Asian cultural appropriation when they depict the West. So there's a famous comic book manga by Osamu Tezuka, the most famous of the manga artists, called Message to Adolf. And it's a depiction of German history during World War II, and perpetrates a theory that at least was popular in Japan for quite a while of Hitler as a self-hating Jew. So it's a really weird, offensive theory. So you see these kinds of cultural appropriation, of course, on the stage as well. A prominent example, of course, is Gilbert and Sullivan's Mikado. I mean, a much loved operetta set in feudal Japan, but of course arising out of a fad for all things Japanese in the Victorian era. Now, the research that Gilbert engaged in to learn about Japan consisted of visiting a village in Knightsbridge, London, a Japanese village, and from that, okay, I can sort of create this operetta. And of course, they've tended to have all white casts and a nonsensical plot, but were considered deeply offensive, particularly in their time, because the play, the Mikado, refers to the godlike emperor, which for Japanese could not be mentioned. But that kind of fact was sort of missed by many. And it is a satire on English mores, English society, but much of the Mikado, I think, is also directed against, can be interpreted as directed against Japan. And there have been some productions which have attempted to have the Mikado depicted in, English dress, with English actors not dressed as Asians, although one televised production I saw from the 80s is the one with Eric Idle, also had these gestures of slanting their eyes at one point. So, the kind of questions raised there. And even more respectful treatments of Asian cultures on the stage have been beset by these kinds of questions and problems. Famous example, of course, is Madame Butterfly by Puccini from 1904, based on an American play about, the abandonment of Cho-Cho-san by a U.S. naval officer. And though it's trying to portray the Asian female antagonist sympathetically, you also get a kind of exoticization of the geisha. And despite the efforts at authenticity in the music, you also have the figure of a kind of passive Oriental girl as the victim. And even Japanese actresses who have played the role of Cho-Cho-san in Madame Butterfly have been told to perform a certain way so that they would look more Oriental, right? So that they would, package it for a kind of Western audience. And you see modern counterparts in, for example, Miss Saigon, which is a sort of version of Madame Butterfly set in the Vietnam War. So these questions have been raised, including in works of art and works of drama, of the Western vision of Asia, depictions of the Orient, as it was called, the Orient as a woman. You see this in plays like David Henry Hwang's M. Butterfly, inspired by an actual historical affair between a French diplomat and a Chinese opera singer who's actually a man. And that's quite a compelling meditation on Asia seen by the West. And there have been arguably some successful and really creative instances of cross-cultural pollination. So for example, we see Kurosawa, the film director, adapting the kind of Wild West genre to a Japanese context in films like Seven Samurai and Yojimbo, and then Sergio Leone, the Italian film director, making spaghetti westerns based on Kurosawa's Japanese adaptation of the Wild West genre. So these are kind of really interesting and often creative and compelling cross-cultural adaptations in the Man with No Name movies. So as these examples show, cross-cultural depictions, I think, in hybrid forms can be thoughtful, rewarding, informative, challenging, enlightening. And as one colleague has pointed out to me, Peking opera has lost some of its interest in China, particularly among younger audiences, and maybe it would be a good thing if we kind of resurrect it in some form, so as to kind of, revive it in some ways. But nevertheless, while artistic freedom is invaluable and must be defended from censorship, arguably artists also have a social responsibility. That if they're going to depict a culture that's largely foreign from their own, this requires a very careful consideration of context, not only of what is depicted on stage, and of course the production choices, but if you're borrowing art forms from a different culture, what are the effects on the intended audience? What are going to be the reactions of the wider community? These things all should be kept in mind. Of course, in a free country, cultural appropriation is legal, there are no laws against it, but it can be tasteless, and it can be offensive in unexpected ways. So the intention to be respectful, I think, is necessary but not sufficient. We have to justify why a certain play is written, why it's set, I mean, in this case, why it's set in China and not North America, why it's not in a purely imaginary setting, for example, why a play might not be linked to a particular historical moment or event, how it's going to avoid the danger, particularly of depicting a culture either in a denigrating fashion or as a kind of exotic entertainment, package for Western consumption. I mean, these are real dangers. So optimally, cross-cultural representations, I think, should be respectful in content and in one's theatrical choices. But that means they require the right kinds of consultation, the right kinds of communication, and the artist has to be self-conscious and self-critical about what is being adapted and why it's being adapted. So those are my comments, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Koo. I would add to the discussion of context that, it is within the lifetimes of many people in this room that American anti-miscegenation laws prevented Asian actors from working. Because part of those laws were that people of Asian cultures and European cultures not only could not have relationships, they could not be depicted in relationships on stage and screen, which led to the very prevalent casting of white people playing Asian characters so they would be allowed to kiss and be married to the other characters. This is something that is not ancient history and absolutely colors the perspective of people today. Gord, would you like to tell us for a few minutes about the Nothing About Us Without Us movement?
Yeah, I'll address it a little bit. Again, I'm Gord White, in case anybody doesn't know me. I'm Mi'kmaq from Newfoundland. I'm Mi'kmaq, French, Irish, and Newfoundlander, so I'm essentially Canada. So throw that in there now. Thank you for doing this. Thank you all for doing this. This is a really good thing. Earlier on today, I was looking on Facebook, and Adrian Wong was addressing another issue of another play with a white person depicting an Asian person, and there was a lovely response that somebody made to it. And Adrian said this phrase, this is how a community holds itself to account, with grace and kindness. So this kind of thing is a community holding itself to account, with grace and kindness. And this is the way to do it. So thank you for doing that. I've worked with a few Native theater companies across the country, and I've worked with a lot of Native theater actors from across the country. And I've done quite a few Native theater plays. And the phrase that has come up recently over the last year from my circles that I work with is the phrase, nothing about us without us. And I will talk to it in terms of, again, from the Native theater perspective. Because the Native theater perspective has been appropriated time and time and time again, and continues to be, and is a constant struggle to keep that awareness of. Nothing about us without us is the idea that, well, if you're going to do one of our stories, where are we? We have to be there. We have to be addressed and asked. It is, a community can come to you if they don't have the tools to present a show and say, can you tell our story? That is a very different thing than looking at something and liking it and then taking it. You can borrow it if you ask. And if they say no, you have to step back. If you take it without asking, then it is appropriation, i.e. stealing. I work with some Native theater companies where there is an artist in residence and an elder in residence. And the elder is talked to during about any production that happens. There are songs in Mi'kmaq culture that cannot be recorded. like audioly or videotaped, and have to be presented orally, and have to be put in certain areas. They have to be presented in certain spots. Honored, respected. They cannot be performed on the stage. They cannot be recorded. If they are to be sung, the audience has to respect and have to stand. So some stories can't be told in this venue. It's just a matter of respect. I've worked with a lot of people who say nothing about us without us is steadfast and hard, and that no one can do it without us. That is a way of thinking of it. I am a little, because I find myself working in a lot of white theater as well as native theater, I'm a bit more lenient on it. But it is more about a community, and you have to go to the community first. And the community has to respond to you in kind. But it's also that matter of going to a community with respect, with honor, and saying, I really like this. Can we do this? Can we talk about this? And another phrase that a friend of mine used during a production where we spent an hour talking about a drum that we were going to use in a show, and he went, native theater is hard. This kind of approach is hard. It is hard, but it's necessary, because we are no longer in just the white theater anymore. We are all here, and we all have to be represented. It's with respect, and it's with honor that we have to proceed with these kind of things. Because if not, then we still have the idea of people wearing headdresses to Tribe Called Red concerts. We still have the idea of people wearing Day of the Dead makeup during Halloween, because it's beautiful. It is beautiful. These are beautiful things. But they mean something else to somebody else. So we have to know that meaning before we can even approach it. It's just a matter of respect. That's all I have.
Thank you, Gord. And we understand that you need to take off any time.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's nice to meet you. I saw your post. Most of you I know. Thank you. That was a lovely speech. Nice to meet you. Good to see you again. All right. I'm going to be one of those guys who just says my piece and then leaves. Let's not do that, Preston.
We appreciate you and your company making the time for us tonight. Thank you. Okay, so it's time to hear from Roy and Vivien.
Sorry, Tom.
And I think in that order, is that sensible? Okay.
That'd be great.
All right. So Roy, tell us about Black Dragon Mountain and your process. I think it's interesting to denote that the play has been in development for a long time, and that it, in effect, sometimes to the public, things are a bit mysterious, but when you are a creator of theater, the development of a play and the written play and the production of a play are three sometimes very different things. And so, you know, people have raised a lot of questions on Facebook lately about the development, and I think that speaks to that question. Roy.
Thank you, Tom. So I'm just going to try and explicate a little bit of why I wrote the play, how I wrote it, and sort of keep to the facts of the process so that people sort of understand what's going on in my head, and with the community of people who actually helped me make this play. I'm going to read this to you. I started writing Black Dragon Mountain in 2011. It began as an adaptation of Li Yu's erotic Chinese classic, The Prayer Man of the Flesh, written in 1643, which I had read during a period of time when I was reading a lot of Chinese literature and plays and poetry. I abandoned the adaptation idea when the play that I started to adapt sort of took on a life of its own. I realized I didn't really want to write an erotic masterpiece. I sort of wanted to tell a different story. Having seen Peking Opera during a trip to China in 2004, I began to imagine a play that blended the color, energy, and visual impact of what I had seen in Beijing with a very contemporary Western pop sensibility. Think Lady Gaga meets Kong Shangren's The Peach Blossom Fan. The play took place in a mythical China with dragons. My directions suggested masks or makeup. Central to the conceit of the play was the confusion of time and place, such that the audience would be regularly reminded that it was not Kansas anymore, or China. This occurred through numerous anachronisms, Canadian euphemisms, character names like Mandy, and the presence of things like plastic surgery, Jewish poets, etc. I'd been wanting to write about love and about the many ways in which it can be co-opted, manipulated, bought and sold, and distorted. And I was also interested in writing about the disguises we employ to hide our deepest wounds and desires. This was made explicit, for example, when one of the characters removes her makeup in the play toward the end of the play in an act of emancipation and self-discovery. The play was to be ribald and raw, comedic in tone, with dollops of drama and tragedy. 2 playwrights had dramaturged it, liked the play and gave constructive notes. 3 more critical readings took place in Halifax and Thunder Bay. I recognize now that the issues of cultural appropriation didn't appear in any explicit or urgent form during this phase of development because we were concentrating on story, character, plot, and other immediate concerns of writers in drama. Only when we began to consider the practical aspects of producing the play did I begin to become aware of the challenges that we might face. I credit Anthony Black and my friend Lisa Cochran for raising the first red flag. Taboo Theatre also declined production due to the possibility of cultural insensitivity, and they deserve some credit too. Stephanie Kincaid and I felt we could present Black Dragon Mountain with a multicultural cast achieved through a colorblind casting process. We also knew that would be a very serious challenge here in Halifax. After a long search for actors, we were only able to cast 1 Chinese-Canadian person who had to drop out due to scheduling challenges. And in the end, our cast had 1 Indian-Canadian and 5 Caucasians. We felt that when experienced, the stage play would be understood in its own context. And I was encouraged as well by the positive response of the several playwrights, mentors, and theater friends who had encouraged me to get the play before an audience. And I'd also hoped that the creative vision of a fusion of cultures would make this play more of a creative hybrid than a direct representation of Chinese culture. On a more personal note, after 4 years with this play, I'd grown affectionate and perhaps blind to how it might be perceived by another culture, specifically the Chinese culture, the Chinese-Canadian culture. As we know from artists like the great Salman Rushdie, it is not always clear to an artist that their work will offend gravely. Once the promotional materials were sent out, we began to see the responses from the Chinese-Canadian and theater community on Twitter and Facebook. And we were all very concerned, and I mean the cast and crew and everybody was concerned. And we tried to engage in that conversation, both on Facebook and Twitter, and try to sort of explicate, talk a little bit about why we were presenting the play. But last Friday, it became clear that the play was not going to be well received. It was my decision to pull the play. My cast and crew were in agreement, but it was my final decision, and it was a good one. I pulled the play because some members of the Chinese-Canadian community felt the play's promotional materials were culturally insensitive and potentially harmful and or offensive to them, and that was clearly not our aim. I make theater to entertain, enlighten, and to grow as a human being. I've been writing since I was 7. And I believe that theater is an important place for us to gather, to see ourselves, to engage our deepest fears, foibles, and desires. I'm sad that Black Dragon Mountain will not see the stage here in Halifax, and it will not be seen. But I'm grateful to have been encouraged and supported by so many. I'm a better playwright because of it. I'm honored to be here today with you. I'm glad my play has created the energy in the world that it has. Energy that can hopefully heal, connect, and join us. I think this day has exceeded any hopes I ever had for my little play about a lonely boy facing life's scariest dragons. Thank you.
So, Vivien, would you like to speak about your concerns and perceptions that you eloquently spoke about on social media, so that everybody now with the context can hear them?
Hi everyone. Can everyone in the back hear me? Just like nod or okay. Thank you for coming out. I'm really excited to hear what every one of you has to say about this, because I'm really happy about all the responses on Facebook. Definitely wasn't what I expected. I was just ranting. I just posted something because I felt very strongly about it, and I think a lot of people here also feel strongly about either their own cultures or the way that they felt the Chinese culture is being represented, and for that I'm really, really thankful, especially to Roy, who has taken this opportunity to reflect on himself, and now you all know a bit about Chinese culture from this time in here. I honestly, the one thing that really stood out to me was sort of, the social responsibility of an artist. How good intentions are great and absolutely probably necessary, but not sufficient to an audience's understanding of it. And I think there's always this sort of thing where, like in a production, there are different parts of it. There's the publicity, there's the actual scripted stuff, there are the people involved, and I think that's the same way in terms of, what are the intentions and how does it come off to the audience. I think a lot of people have voiced, their love for Roy and their love for the play, and that's all great. But I think the one thing I want to stress is that while these themes of the human experience might be universal, we don't live without culture. We are immersed in it, entrenched in it. Every single aspect of our lives, the way that we think about other people, that's all it is. There's nothing apart from it. I think to sort of see only the themes is sort of to take away the most important and integral part of it, the part that speaks to us, that actually resonates with us, that makes us feel things and love things. And I think that I just really wanted everyone here today to know that this isn't about one play, and it is about a larger thing, a larger issue at hand. But at the end of the day, it's about the things that resonate with you as a part of your culture. And when you see that taken away, it hurts. It hurts more than just the word theft. It's hard to explain the feeling that I had just even reading the event page. I wouldn't call it anger. It's more of a loss, and it's a very important part. I think that no one has fully expressed perfectly. I think because it's a very difficult subject, and I think I wish everyone at the end of the day would understand how harmful this can be, and that in propagating these stereotypes, we confine all the individuals around us. We confine them into these sort of definitions of who they should be and who they can be, and that's not who we want to be. That's not who we want to be as a society or as a community. So thank you for coming out here again. That's all I want to say.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to open this up to discussion about Black Dragon Mountain and the different points of view that we have. Some notes about our ways to communicate and protocols. Raise your hand and I will make very strong efforts to make sure everybody who wants to speak is able to speak. I'm asking everyone to be very open and understanding with everybody else's use of language. We have phrases and terminology that we'll be using that mean different things to different people. If you're a little older and went to art school, cultural appropriation might be the way that Greek columns happen to be in buildings all over the world. Or how the Easter Bunny and Jesus got together in the first place, or how in fact you might have come from yoga class today, even though your great-grandmother certainly never practiced yoga. To someone who's younger and maybe came to that term through the social justice movement, it may mean a very specific type of harmful and damaging borrowing from one culture to another, and only that. I think so long as we don't spend our time trying to bring each other around on semantics, we'll have a much more fruitful conversation. Okay, does anybody on the stage have something to add to the discussion about Black Dragon Mountain?
I'll say something in context. I'll say I was contacted a few early. I don't know when it was. I guess it was this summer, about being in the play, and you know, I sort of read. I skimmed mostly. I knew I probably wasn't going to be able to be involved, so I had said, you know, I can't be involved, and I'm sorry. And yeah, I saw the names, some of the names and things like that, and of course it piqued something. But I also really refused to say or do anything about it until or if I had done something, unless I spoke to him first. Because I don't know, as performing, we never know, and as an artist, we never know what someone's intention is until you actually sit and speak with them. So, and I've been completely a victim of being accused of appropriating my own culture by non-members of my own culture, and things like that before they actually ever had a chance to talk to me about what I was doing or why. So I basically refused to give any judgment there right off the top, or you know, just or even question it. Well, no, you question it yourself. You're like, really, would that be my name? But at the same time, I don't know if that would have been, if you know, things would have changed, or if that was it. You know, so we'll never really know. Anyway, that's all.
Well, I guess I think that's part of the problem. You know, there was, you know, the communication is so crucial right from the beginning. I didn't know about this play. Oh, I didn't hear about this play. I didn't know about this play until recently when a friend brought it to my attention. So my biggest concern was who was consulted. You know, when were they consulted? You know, people from the Chinese community, were they consulted? I know that it's easy for theater to exist in a bubble, that you consult other dramatists or playwrights and get their feedback. But if it does contain content that has anything to do with a visible minority, whether it be a different race, a culture, disability, gay, lesbian, transgender, you need to consult those groups. You need to consult those groups, and early. I know that it's probably not the usual practice in art, because you think, oh, art is out of my imagination. It's from my imagination. It's my work. But when I think it's been reiterated many times tonight that it's the reaction, the effect on the audience. So it needs to be responsible to that and be accountable for that. So from a communications point of view, because that's my profession, I do many public consultations, meetings with different groups to make sure that everybody's on the same page, and not that it's censorship. I do not want to. I'm sorry I even brought that up, but yeah, I know it's been brought up on the Facebook event page about censorship, but I think input and censorship are totally different things. I don't think necessarily we wanted it to be canceled completely, Vivien. I didn't.
I didn't plan for that.
Yeah, exactly. We just wanted people to talk about it, to discuss, open the discussion, start the discussion, and then if the play changed, great. If the play didn't change, there could be some problems. If there's any red flag of racism or cultural appropriation, misrepresentation of the culture, that is a red flag. There has to be some action around it, and I do feel terrible about the cast and crew, that it's been canceled, that they worked so hard on it, and I know there wasn't any negative intention around with this play, this production. So, yeah, that's.
Thank you. So I would like to open the discussion with three statements I received during an open call for statements from people who couldn't be here tonight or felt like they didn't want to be here tonight. So one may have already been referenced tonight. Over the past few days, I've seen little to none of the Halifax theatre community that I love so much. What's taken place is a mean, vicious, disintegrated, torn apart community, where if you don't agree with your colleague, you're deemed wrong, vehemently, viciously. People who are usually respectful and supportive, becoming rude and tearing each other apart. I know the topic has been a tough one. As much as I'm glad the topic is being raised, my heart has taken a beating over how people I love have treated one another. No matter how tough the situation is, we should always try to learn, speak, hear, and commit to understanding with compassion and grace. That's from Lita Llewellyn. And two very disparate comments about the play. I wish I could be there to contribute. I just want to say, canceling the show was the bare minimum, the least that should be expected. The bottom line is this is an instance of racism and cultural appropriation. Until we acknowledge that we have a racism problem in Halifax, we're not going to get anywhere. It's okay to talk about it. Avoiding it or pretending we fixed it a long time ago doesn't help. That's Jacqueline Vincent. And finally, from furthest afield, we have a comment saying, there is nothing wrong for white actors to play Chinese or Indian characters. Theater should spread the message of tolerance and kindness, not prejudice and narrow-minded perspective. It is perfectly common in multicultural Singapore to see Malay theater groups play Chinese or interpret elements of Indian dance or Chinese opera. Chinese dance groups have since long ago used balletic movements to tell Chinese stories. I created a dance drama called Magic Lotus, based on a Chinese legend, presented in Belfast, with a German playing Erlang Shen, an Irish playing the goddess, and an African student playing the scholar. I thank you for the interesting costume design. That is from Dr. Chua Su Pong, founding director of the Chinese Opera Institute in Singapore, an adjunct professor at Xiamen University in China, where he teaches Southeast Asian theater and acts as advisor to 14 Chinese opera groups. So a wide variety of opinions in my inbox over the last 24 hours. Okay, let's do this. If you have something to say, please raise your hand. I'm going to ask people to keep it to a couple of minutes each so lots of people have an opportunity to speak. Hi.
Hi, I'm Chris.
Hi, Chris.
For anyone who's in the office from here, Jane is my mom, Mimi and David are my grandparents, and he's here though. So I guess I'll just situate myself, like I'm a student activist, I'm also a historian of Chinese experience in North America, specifically Chinese American politics. So I think that to situate this, I just want to actually, I wasn't planning on saying this, but I just want to say how comfortable I am that a number of people in the audience clapped when they found a Chinese person, or someone from Singapore, someone with an Asian sounding name who supported their position. Right? Like that's a pretty uncomfortable thing. You should think about why, like when we talk about tokenism, in a lot of ways that's often what we're talking about. I think the issue is complicated. But one thing I want to talk about specifically is, I'm not a theater practitioner. I go to the theater, not as often as I probably should, but I guess a couple things I want to talk about from the perspective of being like a Chinese Canadian in Halifax. One of them is that the moment when you try to cast the play, and we're like, yo, we can't actually find, like, I don't know any Chinese Canadian actors, that should have been the first point of pause, right? Which I think that the moment when you should realize, like, yo, maybe that this story is not one for me to tell, and that like we've got bigger problems that we need to sort of grapple with before we move on. I think that the cast and crew know that now. I don't want to sort of beat up on that. What I do want to talk about more broadly is the thing that got me when I looked at it was when I saw the play, and my original plan was like I wasn't going to really say anything. I was going to go to the play, I was going to watch it, and then I'm going to probably right. But my reaction when I saw the actual materials that were being advertised was, and the description of it is that like the thing is like I would rather to a certain extent that white people dislike me for being Asian than white people like me because the Chinese are mystical and we have dragons. Right? Like that Orientalism, the idea that the Orient, that the East is a place of mysticism and magic, is the way that we've been described since the first time that people showed up and tried to extract wealth from the West and drag it back to Europe, right? Like that's the description of us when like my grandfather came here to work on the railroad and couldn't find work. It was the assumption that there was something incredibly foreign in the mysticism. So like the other thing I looked at when I saw the play's description was one that it was like, I don't understand why you wouldn't take the form. Like I understand this interest in form, right? That I think that like I'm not a huge opera fan, but I understand why people are drawn to that, and particularly like sort of this Peking style. I couldn't understand why like, the more interesting artistic choice wouldn't be to take the form and structure of it and place it within a Western context and a Western story. Like to me, this is not an attempt to like judge art, but it's like that is both a more interesting attempt, but also an attempt to grapple with it, with the problem of dealing with that sort of culture while putting it in a way that's like from a perspective that you can write from, right? Which is like to place that style within the context of a Western story. And I guess I just want to emphasize the degree to which like we unthinkingly describe Asian culture entirely as a sort of magical, and often like people use in the West use like magical realism or other sort of forms of attempting to mysticize a culture that they don't necessarily understand. But I also want to emphasize the degree to which it's like there are a frustration I have, which is that I spent today because I was at work binge watching the new Aziz Ansari Netflix show, right? Yeah. And that's like an example of the thing where it's like that's actually like in this case South Asian, but like a South Asian American story, right? And so one of the things is that it's like the degree to which within Canadian theater, more broadly, there's so few stories about like the Canadian Chinese experience that it's so weird to then see when Canadian artists of any sort, be they white or otherwise, want to tell a story that's foreign from them or create space to tell that story, that they turn to a story that is like Asian instead of like Asian Canadian, right? And there is sort of a distinction between those two stories. And I find that that's sort of where I was coming from. And I don't think this show obviously should have been canceled. I was planning on buying a ticket for it. But I do think that like these are the sorts of concerns that as someone who no longer as much involved in theater, but who cares deeply about these things, who's grown up, I don't think that is sort of what got me where I look at it, which is like this seems weird. Yeah, that's I guess where I'm coming from.
Thank you. Applause for you too.
Cory,
I just want to say, like, I think it's very kind for people to say, like, I don't. It's okay to. It's okay for the show to be canceled. I don't like this whole. I don't want the show to be canceled. It's fine. The whole compassion thing is sort of. It's great, but it's just as compassionate to be very honest and open about something that you just completely despise. I mean, it's fine, or something you don't agree with something, or something is painful. I mean, we always follow up these things with a little bit of safe, but it's great. With it, like the show should have been canceled. No offense, the show should have been canceled. It's caused a big uproar, and this is better than the show. I'm sorry to say, but this is. I don't. I think I heard it. I know I'm doing a compassion thing, but I'm saying it in the sense of I'm not saying that the show shouldn't be canceled. It's like it's like we yeah. I mean, I'm Canadian, I guess. It's just kind of interesting. I'm totally contradicting it, but it's true. It's like it's okay to.
Well, I still feel bad see the show. I wanted everyone to see the show and look at it, watch it, and question things, and have a discussion about it afterward. And if it was a shit show, and people like who had like torches and like pitchforks, it's like shut this show down, then great.
Yeah.
Go for it. I wanted to see how it would unroll, unravel, unroll or roll or unravel.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Some more hands, you in front.
So I wasn't gonna initially come because I just came off work and I was like dead. So I'm
Okay,
gonna
should
try.
be hard in the back.
Sorry.
Can't
I'm
hear
gonna try to congregate what remaining thoughts I have in my head and something like coherent that I can say out to you guys.
Thank you.
So the first thing I'd like to say is that this is an issue that sits like very near and dear to my heart, Asian culture, because I immigrated to Canada when I was 5, so I am as much Canadian as I am Chinese. And I guess like my first reaction, I have to say that when I saw this, I didn't know about this play until about 2 days ago, when it was posted to this Facebook group that I'm following, was that I saw a poster for it, and I was like, oh, this is really neat, something about China, again, is trying to be depicted respectfully in Halifax. And then I read the description of the play, and of course, like, not anybody else, I don't mean any offense, but I was, like, the first thought I had was, excuse my, whatever phrase I had, was, oh great, it's another white guy trying to write about mystic, the Oriental, like, mysterious Asia. And I was just like, oh my god, like, not again. We have seen this time again, of this depiction of us of being in China as this mystical thing, can't reach with dragons and monks, and it's like, people don't realize that while this still exists, we have mountains, we have everything like that, but China's also modernized. I have people who still believe that China doesn't have modern cities, that doesn't have cars, that people still live in straw shacks. So like that's the kind of thing that we're trying to fight against. And I guess my biggest issue is, aside from all of that, is the fact that if other Asian Americans or Chinese people try to tell a story like this, they would be lauded as, okay, it's not original, you're just telling people about your own culture, or this is weird, this is strange, picking opera, like who the hell cares? But as soon as somebody else, namely somebody Westernized, somebody white, takes it and puts it out there, suddenly they're quirky, they're interesting, they make it consumable for Western culture, and it's really frustrating to me, and it's very hurtful for somebody like me who's grown up in Western Newfoundland, in Fredericton their entire lives, trying to decolonialize myself and to wrap myself back in my own culture that's been years and years pushing away. The fact that someone could just take this from me and say, you know what, it's cool again. I'm gonna make it cool again. So it doesn't matter, like, sorry, I totally lost my train of thought there.
It's okay.
But the fact that we can't ourselves, my own people, can't put out this kind of story with a good response, with positive response as somebody else outside culture take it, and by all means try to respectfully depict it, but not maybe accurately, and be applauded as, wow, this is so good, is very hurtful.
Yeah, I think we would, if I wrote this play, I think I would be accused of pushing stereotypes,
Yeah.
the Asian stereotype. How can you do this to your own people? You're not advancing our culture at all. Yeah, so, yeah, completely agree. Yeah.
Thank you. Sharleen.
So I just wanted to kind of give my perspective of this. I'm not necessarily responding to what has been said. I just want to say what I need to say.
Thanks.
I was part of the cast of Black Dragon Mountain, and so I just wanted to share a little bit about my personal perspective of what I feel happened. This has been a great learning experience for me. It's really, my eyes are open and I am listening, and I have learned a lot over the past few days. But at the same time, it has been a very sad few days for me. I think for the cast in general, because I'm also an actor, and I really did love this play, and I just can't help but feel that it didn't get its chance to show what it had to offer the city. A lot of assumptions have been made by it, about it, I mean, and it just didn't get its chance. I really believed in it, and I don't think I'm alone with my cast in that. I believed in the message city kind of lost out a little bit here. While I was trying to kind of understand everything that was being said, I tried to put myself in the Chinese community's shoes or your shoes, and I'm Indian, and I thought, well, how would I feel if I had learned of a play that was being put on that was depicting aspects of Indian culture, not Indian culture, because once again this play wasn't really about Chinese culture, but aspects of Indian culture. How would I feel? And I really self-reflected and thought about it, and I have to say, I just feel with the amount of diversity there is in the city, which I feel is not very much at all, if I were to see something being put out there about Indian culture, I really would feel grateful that it was being put out there. Because maybe, just maybe, even if it wasn't completely accurate or coming from somebody of Indian origin, maybe it would be planting a seed, and it would grow from there, and it would increase curiosity, and it would promote learning, and create a path, just maybe. And on the flip side, I thought about, well, what if I was cast in a play like that because I was Indian? Then how would I feel? And part of me would feel absolutely, that would be awesome. I would be entitled to that. But part of me would also feel that because I am also Canadian, I have my Indian origin, but I am so westernized that in some way I wouldn't feel that authentic. Just because I was brown, it doesn't necessarily mean I would be completely authentic. So it's a really difficult area for me. I'm struggling to understand everything that's being said, and I'm so grateful that we're here today to discuss this. But I also just wanted to portray my pain at this great loss that I feel, that I'm still grieving, that we never got to show what we had to offer.
Thank you. The woman in white.
Hi, I'm also a student at Dell. I've been following, for some reason I saw the page, I thought it was cool, and I read it, and I thought it wasn't that cool, for reasons. I think there have been a lot of people commenting on the play, the event page, saying, I am an immigrant, I'm a minority, and I think this is okay. And those voices seem to be elevated. And that like what Chris was saying earlier, that's tokenism. That's one voice doesn't speak out for an entire community, but we should take out the multitude of voices that are speaking out against this is not okay. The representation of us, whether it's authentic or not, or whether it's about our culture or not, when people from the community come together and say this is not okay, then it's not. I think it's simple as that. I think I am grateful when I see aspects of my own culture on TV, and it's nice, and sometimes it's not presented in the best way, but it's like, hey, at least there's a yellow dude on there. But then what is achieved in that way? What's the message being sent out? At least there's someone there, but what's the message that they're giving out? Right? And I think that's the crux of it. The message is the crux of it. And I think some people are not really quite getting that. It's not about intent, it's about impact.
Jacob.
Yeah, hi. I just want to respond to some of the things that have been to the comment made earlier about the doctor who likes to bring Peking opera to places like Europe, and that being applauded. That is somebody from a cultural group taking a story and performing a story that is inherently theirs. And it is very different, and I respect that the doctor's comment, but it is a very different reality being here in North America as a visual minority. It just is. It is not the same as being me being of black descent or African descent. And going to Africa is going to be just a mind-boggling experience if and when it ever happens. And so that comment, I value it, but it's a different situation here, and that needs to be considered. Something I want to comment on to my theater practitioners in the room is this whole concept of I can't find the actors. I played a slave 4 times in my career, and that's okay. It's okay because those stories, at some point, no, those stories need to be told. If they're not told, okay, so they're not told every day, and somebody's got to play the part, and that's fine. But the whole concept of I can't find the actors. A quick thing I want to say is we as theater practitioners, and the majority of us as theater practitioners are of European descent, if we wish to tell stories from somebody's culture, and I appreciate those who want to do that, because otherwise I would not get on stage. We would not get on stage because you, and I use the proverbial you, and I don't mean it in any sort of derogatory fashion, but you have the theater companies. You have the funding. You have the expertise in the field. And so this whole we can't find the actors. Quick 15-minute Google search today. St. Mary's Chinese Student Society, Multicultural Association of Halifax, the Chinese Society of Nova Scotia, the Nova Scotia Chinese Culture and Art Club of Nova Scotia. And I'm not saying that these groups weren't reached out to. What I'm saying is it's our responsibility, if we want to tell these stories, to find the actors. And yes, are there going to be staunch professionals? No. But if we want to tell the stories, there won't be the actors unless we develop them. That's just a fact. We won't come to you. We can't. Because the door's been shut for so long. A few of us might peek our heads in every once in a while, but we just can't come to you. And I was actually approached to be a part of this play, and I respectfully declined, based on the fact that this colorblind casting thing. Some of the most staunch defenders of colorblind casting that I know are of European descent. Colorblind casting is a beautiful idea. It is a beautiful thing, and I hope someday we're there. It's a beautiful idea like communism. Communism is a beautiful, it is, it's a beautiful idea. I'm sorry if that offends anybody, it is. But we are not there yet. As a people, we're just not there. And this colorblind casting thing, a cast can be colorblind. When I went to Rock Bottom the other day, I saw a table with 2 Lebanese guys, a black female, 2 Chinese students, somebody from India, all sitting around a table having a few drinks. You want to tell that story? Colorblind cast all over the place. But when we are talking about a cultural group, throwing somebody of a different culture, just another minority, doesn't excuse the fact that, again, we didn't find the actors. You found multi-ethnic actors, but you didn't find the actors that need to tell the story. And you have to develop them. And that's yeah.
Thank you, Jacob.
Just quickly from the, I agree with you completely about, this is kind of different from actually reviving Peking opera, and I think from what we've kind of learned about the play, it was a very kind of glancing use and a kind of appropriation of Peking opera combined with the play that was, and this is another kind of aspect, that it was going to be a comedy, and that runs into very dangerous territory if you're kind of, kind of appropriating different aspects of a culture, presenting them for comic effect, inevitably you're going to say all sorts of things which are rather offensive, as well as perhaps perpetuating a number of stereotypes as being pointed out in a number of comments.
Okay, so we've already moved the conversation a little bit outside of Black Dragon Mountain, and I think it's reasonable to acknowledge that in our local theater ecology, a couple of things. One, colorblind casting is a concept that is intended to open the doors of theater to reflect casts that reflect the population. And so there have been successes with colorblind casting in many places, New York, Toronto, Los Angeles. Colorblind casting with a starting point of a population that's 93% white is not automatically going to lead to different results. Our process here things that work for other places and populations may not work for us. In recent years, we see a lot of white actors cast in a lot of productions as characters of other ethnicities. We, of course, have the Mikado come around every few years from the Gilbert and Sullivan Society. I think we have some folks from GNS here tonight. One Light Theatre did the Doomsday Machine. Did I say that correctly? And that's a show based on a book from Iran, and white actors were ultimately cast in those roles. Neptune did the Jungle Book, and that was a largely white cast in the jungle. Of course, every year we have the most popular performances at the Fringe Festival are the belly dancing shows, which always features a lot of white women in the costumes of various parts of the world, showing us the skills they've developed at the belly dancing studio. So it's really not just a question about Black Dragon Mountain, it's about how we, as a theater community, address multiculturalism. And so I want to open it up to discussions about some of the other shows and some of the other experiences. Vivien?
I just wanted to add one thing about this whole white casting thing. It's not just about white people. I think, wow, I totally lost my thought, I'm sorry. When it comes to sort of casting, it's I'm going to do the white people thing again just because it's easy. You don't have to fight as hard to be heard each and every single day. And a lot of other people do. It's like you can say something, and I'll say something, and it's not the same. It's not the same, not just because I'm small. That's part of it, but it's, there's a lot of different things, and it's like when you are trying to tell someone's story, even just it's an aspect of their story, you take away a very crucial part of it, because it's, my experience, the way that I live my life, because I look a certain way, is not something that can be replicated. It's not. Obviously it's a Chinese-Canadian experience, but it's, for someone to say, oh, this, here's this person who, can easily say something that you would say and you respect him more for it, and he's going to tell your story for you, even though he doesn't know me, and he doesn't know anything about me, and I'm making it very individual because I feel like people still don't understand this idea, is that this whole discussion is us fighting to be heard. And even at the end of the day, some of you are going to walk out of here and you're not going to hear us.
Pasha Ebrahimi.
I've refrained from speaking because my opinions can somewhat be harsh from those of you that know me. But I'm an immigrant. I'm from Iran originally. I chose to be an actor in Halifax. Don't ask me why. That being said, I was also asked to audition for this play, I raised concerns immediately in my first email back to Stephanie Kincaid, who and I never spoke, just to make that perfectly clear. About the casting. Who else was being approached? Were there any actual Chinese actors being approached? I received an unsatisfactory answer, at which point I very politely declined to audition, because my concerns were met with ambivalence.
Can you please speak up?
Yes, sorry. I am not on social media. I don't like it. I'm a very private person. That being said, I'm also not in any way a supporter of censorship. I don't think anyone has the right to tell me I can't play something, but at the same time, I like to think that I have enough sense to not go up for the role of a black lesbian and say that I should have a right to audition for that. There have been many times when I've gone up to audition for certain parts where I've been told that I'm not white enough, or that I've lost out roles that are from my cultural background to a Caucasian individual. That's a fact. I'm not making any sort of wicked statement either way on that. So that being said, I think a lot of people have already chimed in on this, and I just want to say that it is very much a prevalent issue. Racism in any aspect of culture, whether it's in the arts, whether it's in politics. Once again, I apologize to any Republicans, supporters, but it's that, hey, look, we have a black representative and we have a Chinese representative. So why don't you guys get behind your own kind and join us? That's never been something that I've taken lightly. And when it comes to Neptune Theater's practices of bringing other actors in, regardless of how talented they are, over local actors, for whatever insert reason A, B, or C here, or even local theater productions, deciding to cast someone because, as Jacob said, the actors aren't available. How hard did you try? In any production, I myself, back in university, and this is back on the shelf, wanted to write a version of Dr. Faustus with native themes. I spoke to Gordon about it. He's unfortunately not here, because of his Mi'kmaq background. But for me, the first step was reaching out to that community. And this is my idea. What do you think? Can I get some feedback? Because I've faced a lot of racism over the years, not simply in the city, came from Iran. When I was in Istanbul, Turkish kids hated me because I was Persian. It's different. But the number one issue is that nobody should tell you what you can and can't do. But there are ways of, especially in the arts, doing it properly. And when you're saying you want to tell a story, and you're influenced by it. I love Japanese culture, I love Asian culture, I love cultures of all types. You should know well enough to say, perhaps people will take this the wrong way if I don't reach out to them, make that bridge, and move forward accordingly. Anyway, I'm rambling. Sorry.
Thank you, Pasha. I want to point out that Pasha plays Dr. Patrick O'Carroll on TV. Who's not a black lesbian.
What's your county if you're playing an Irish person?
That was my process of colorblind casting that we arrived at that.
And that could be my grandfather was Irish, so I may not have a county because I might be third generation removed. So,
I know what you mean.
yeah.
There you
I
go.
know what you mean.
So there are very easy answers to that type of casting. If you go looking for the answers.
Hi.
I wanted to ask Roy, I don't know how long you production and how many people are involved. But somebody has taken a hell of a financial hit in deciding to cancel this because there are still bills to pay. And I wonder if you would speak to that or willing to speak to that at all so we have some understanding. I've never funded a play and I have no idea how it works.
Sorry, what was your name?
Alan Ruffman?
Alan?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, Alan, I mean, I guess I'm partially aware now that we're trying to sort of move away from specific questions about the play to greater questions, but I mean, I footed the bill, all of it, and I'm taking the hit, but I really don't think that's the least of my concerns, honestly.
I'll come back to Roy again. As you gave your very short, or you gave a short biography of him, I've not been to China. I haven't done a lot of the things you've done. I haven't read nearly what I think you've read. So I had some, knowing who's put this together, I had some feeling that you would have done a better job than some because of your experience. And maybe where it's fallen down is that it wasn't a passe-muraille type of a process, a workshopping process, or one thing I'm sure that several people have said, the script should have gone out to a number of people in whose opinion you'd have a lot of faith. Some of them might be even sitting in the front row here. But, and I don't know whether that happened or not. And then you suddenly come up to someone who's trying to give you a criticism in 140 characters on Twitter. I am a great suspect, as others, of that type of social media. Whereas the kind of presentation I heard from Professor King's, that kind of a critic of your script might have led to changes which would never have given the publicity concerns that we have. I, for one, am interested. If it comes back and somewhere it's being shown, I hope I see the promo and I'll buy a ticket.
Thank you.
Well, that seems to raise questions, moving the conversation towards the different aspects of creative practice. How a play is one thing, how the direction of that play is another thing, and how costume designers can influence the impression that is given. I think you specified the script did not actually call for the full costuming of the Peking opera, but that was a choice that got made by the director and designer of the show, and that's what got out into social media and seems like was the focus of a lot of the concern. Sorry, Vivien, you
No, I'm sorry, I just didn't understand that last thought. I'm just confused. Can I ask for clarification? I don't understand that last.
From Alan?
Yeah, from Alan, sorry. I don't quite understand the point of what you were trying to say.
Right, 2 points. In terms of where this story came from, it came, I gather, on Twitter and on Facebook. I'm uneasy about people who attempt to have discussions on Twitter in little short bursts of 140 characters. Hard to conceive of a conversation that's meaningful. So that's a criticism, perhaps, of some of the sources that you or others are using. Whereas the kind of analysis I hear from the professor, where he's put a lot of thoughts together, allow me to perhaps have a better understanding. I don't think I quite understand, and didn't in your presentation understand, the criticisms. You conceded it was hard to explain, but the criticisms of the publicity, and maybe that's because I didn't see the publicity other than when it blew up the last couple of days.
I think maybe you should read the Facebook comments that she made.
Yeah.
Vivien's
They
comments
were
were
pretty long.
extreme
Yeah.
and very eloquent.
Very long. I don't know if anyone wanted a rehashing of the discussion, but I don't know, I guess like.
And to be honest, like, this wouldn't be happening without social media. We wouldn't be here today discussing together without it. I mean, Vivien did make really good, succinct, eloquent, insightful comments about the play, about cultural appropriation, about trying to get us to move forward, I guess. And that's why we're here.
Without social media, all discussion before and after play is limited to usually one person writing in the press. They're the person who gets the right of way, and they get to say, they get to decide they get to review, and the people walk away and they talk about it. Social media opens up all the channels. As she said, it gets people here, it gets other voices speaking, sometimes not so eloquently, sometimes in fights, but most of the time, people are there. They're all reading it, they're all locked on it. And without it, we wouldn't, we've advanced so far because of it. And yes, in some ways, there's some crazy things that happen on social media, people just get, but at the same time, gee, if it wasn't for it, nobody would have a voice at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't be here if Vivien hadn't come to see me earlier this week, and we had great discussions. I've been very impressed with her eloquence, and really, and she's kind of brought it home in terms of her personal reactions, and has made it sort of real in a way that, it's a true eloquence.
And one thing that we can't really do here today is discuss the merits of Roy's play. Really, we are not informed enough. Nobody saw it. Almost nobody has read it. Whether it should ever have a life in another form, in another time and place with an all-Chinese cast, are questions that, as a group, we are simply not able to intelligently talk about, because Roy made the choice to cancel the show and have a discussion about cultural appropriation and cultural identity instead. So we'll move on, I think, from that particular question. Hi.
Hi. So I wanted to say some things about some options that the theater community might have if you're trying to work. For me, there's so many other questions around who has the money, who has the credibility.
A little louder, please.
Yeah, right.
I know.
So the question about who has the money, who has the credibility, who has the audience, who has the personal relationships, who doesn't face racism or all the other isms in the theater community is, for me, it's about the structures that support moments like this to happen. It's about the structures that supported the play to potentially get on stage, even though there were concerns raised about it, right? There's still structures, and there's funding, and there's support, and there's personal networks, and there's access to space. Who has access to these spaces, right? So those are all the structural things that I think are really important. For me, when I'm starting to think about these things, I'm from Edmonton, so also a bit of a similar sort of theater scene. We struggle a lot. It's a very white theater scene. It's very there's a very small theater ecology, as you said. So we've been struggling with these things as well for many years. And some of the things that are starting to work are very dedicated theater programs that build skills in particular communities. Theater communities that are open only to youth of color, led by leaders of color and theater practitioners of color, fully funded. These people are fully paid at professional wages, access to the best technical equipment, access to best technical expertise. These are the things that are making a difference. What's also making a difference is quota systems in theaters. If you're programming your season, you have a quota for Indigenous theater. You have a quota for theater done by folks of color. These are some of the things that are working. So I know a lot of, there's in discussions about color blindness, or in discussions, I know there's a lot of contention about our Fringe Festival. We had a whole discussion about, it's not a jury process. It's a lottery process. Anyone can produce a play at the Fringe. So there's been a lot of discussion about, should we actually have a bit of a quota system? It's been quite controversial for artists, theater artists of color, or theater artists with disabilities, or theater artists who are queer or transgender. And a lot of the established theater communities reacting really intensely to it. Understandably, because we're coming for your space.
Okay.
We're coming for your money.
Yes.
We want to tell our stories, and we're sick of waiting for you to give it to us anymore. So we're going to show up, we're going to post on social media, we're going to come tell you when we think you're making a mistake, and it's actually quite hurtful. We're coming.
Oh man, I have a quote on my show. There's no white people on it. It's a black show. It's good. You're right. It's important. It's really important.
So let's talk about some other tools besides quotas. And in Nova Scotia, the size of the established theater community is pretty pretty small and not so established and pretty fragile to begin with. But you know, I'm surprised to hear some of the controversial viewpoints on colorblind casting as a concept. But it would be good to talk about assumptions about written characters, or how to create equal opportunities for all actors of all backgrounds. What can be in our local toolbox that we're not using effectively to try to improve cultural representation in our theater? And we can extend that to film and television and our other local art scenes. Okay? All right.
I'd like to just say one quick thing about Coda. I would love it, ideally, in a perfect world, in communism. No political affiliation. But in a perfect world, I would love it if I walked into a room, myself, let's say everyone in this lineup here, for the same role. And the best actor got that role. I'm talking about acting specifically. The best actor got that role. I would love that. If I lost out to someone for a role because they were better than me in that role, that would make me extremely happy, because that means I get to grow as an actor, I get to develop, I get to go further with my career. However, I've been in rooms where I've lost out to someone because of the color of my skin, because of they didn't like me, which is fine, I guess. But at the same time, the only danger with the quota system is that I don't want a handout. I don't want you to give me a segment that is specifically, hey, there you go, Persian boy, this is for you. You get to do your job. I want my piece, but I want to earn my piece without racism, without somebody cutting me out because I'm not of a particular brand they want to have associated with their theater company. I don't want to work for that theater. So that's my only concern with quota. You have a system all your own, which I respect. It's perfect. You don't want to cast any white people, that's great. You created your own theater, that's fine. That's a system that works. You didn't wait for someone to give you that. You made that. Perfect. That's my concern, is that when it comes to the quota system, when it comes to looking for somebody else to step in and do it for us, what does that say about us as artists? What does that say about us as minorities? What does that say about us as people?
I think that's a completely valid viewpoint. I think that's a one that gets raised quite often. But I think when it comes to things like leveling the playing field, like the quota system, it's about acknowledging that minorities come from disadvantaged backgrounds, that they don't have perhaps the access to certain spaces, and it's just about, it's like social welfare, leveling the playing field so that the rich kid whose dad pays for his university education is on the same field as the guy who can get a scholarship, or as if that makes any sense. It's not about giving a handout, it's about leveling the playing field so that those who traditionally have privileged positions in society are not benefiting from that privilege when it comes to certain spaces.
And I agree with you, in a professional setting, definitely, like in a school setting, completely agree with you. Arts, it becomes more subjective. So who's judging this? Who's judging what's level? Who's judging how that becomes level? Like, what are our representatives? Like within this room, for example, we have how many different cultures? Who's counting which cultures and who is from that culture? How much of a percentage that culture gets as opposed to another culture? It's not that clear cut.
And it's a flawed system. It's a flawed, but we're already living in a flawed system. Yeah.
I'd rather fight for a better system than live in a flawed system. That's just me. I can't speak for everyone.
You know that I'm talking about one show, right?
I
mean, that's another story.
No,
with him. But it's one show. It's one show. Specifically.
Sorry.
Wait a minute. I'm never going out.
Chris.
Yeah, I guess one thing I will speak to is, in the past I have been involved in our Facebook Halifax pop explosion, which has and continues to have, like, a major problem with the booking of bands all over the place. It's an incredibly white festival. It was white when I was there. It hasn't gotten any less white. And we attempted to and failed on some things, but one thing that did have success, although it was extremely time intensive, was an African Nova Scotian mentoring program where we hired 2 African Nova Scotian students who were both high school students on a government grant, and used that basically to try to increase, because one of the things we recognized when we talked to folks in the African Nova Scotian community was the degree to which a lot of particularly the administrative skills were held within white people in the music community. So particularly in the hip hop community, it's always easier for white rappers to get shows, get on big bills for touring bands, that sort of thing. It's easier for them to get their demo tapes into played in CKDU. It's all those sorts of things. And so one of the things that was specifically asked of us was to go out and try to improve administrative skills. The program only lasted 1 year because the person who was running it ended up taking another job. I mean, I think there was some value and success in that. I think if had it continued, it would be good. And I think that that's sort of, I think one of the things that should be emphasized is the degree to which, like, these are things that need to start early. And I think the person whose name I didn't catch up front from Edmonton made mention of sort of youth programs that emphasize this. And I think that that's where it's important. And I do think another thing that, sorry, I didn't catch your name, that you emphasized is the degree to which, like, it's going to require a loss, right? Like, there's a limited amount of money in the arts. And if $10,000 grant goes to an African Nova Scotian mentoring program, that's going to be realistically probably around $10,000 less. It's going to go to other funding in the arts, and you need to and people need to accept that. And I know it's hard in the theater community because, like, every professional actor I know is barely stringing it together. Like, people who work regular shows, a lot of them are really struggling financially. Directors are paying for shows out of their own pockets. Writers are paying for shows out of their own pockets. I think that there needs to be an acceptance that, to a certain degree, you're going to lose out on funding. There are reasons cost of funding available, that sort of thing, but, like, there's going to be a loss. Like, it's a ledger sheet, and realistically, if you want to solve the problem, you have to accept that, as was eloquently stated, like, we're coming for your space, we're coming for your money. You need to embrace that, but still make the theater better in the long run. It'll make more interesting theater, like, also, right? Like, I think that's one thing that we haven't talked about.
Jacob, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I think to talk more about Black Dragon Mountain, I personally don't want to see this play die. I don't want to see it buried away. I think the point is consultation is key. Consultation is key. I think that's what I hope we walk away from today. Where, I mean, talking about Pasha's Irish role, I'm half Irish. And so that's the reality of our kitchen tables in Nova Scotia. Right? That is our kitchen table, and it can happen. So cultures can and should come together, especially in the arts, because that's where it can happen freely. But the point is consultation is key. And I think with consultation, hopefully, something beautiful can take place that is multi-diverse and multi-ethnic. And to talk further on Pasha talking about roles and things like that as us as a community, again, colorblind casting is it's a beautiful thing. I've been casted in roles that normally I wouldn't be casted in, but I think the important thing is for people who are casting those roles is the acknowledgement that it is still a choice, because we live in the world where quotas are necessary. I mean, I have to question every time I go for a job. Pasha, we have to question every time we go for a job if it was a hand. And we're told all the time, if we get a $10,000 grant, probably catch a black. So if we earn it, great, but we didn't earn it. And so it's still a choice. Casting the black guy in an angry role, like, you can do it, and I'm like, cool, we'll do it, but, like, it's been done, and it's kind of a choice. It's always a choice. It can never not be a choice. And you might garner some resistance to that. You, as a theater practitioner or a director or a writer, might encounter some resistance from the community in which you live, and you might not be expecting that, and that can be a scary, I've seen it. It's a scary thing for people of European descent to come up against, well, what is that? And you gotta go, oh, that's racism. sorry, you're in it now. Come on in, we'll talk about it. It's okay.
I think I know a little bit about that.
So, here's what I'm saying. I don't want to see this play die, but I think what I'd like to see is just consultation is key, and it's always a choice. It's always a choice to cast somebody who we don't see it. Female, male, black, white. It's a choice, and acknowledge the choice, consult who you're speaking with, and move forward together. But togetherness has to be the key. You can't do things. You don't have the luxury to do things alone when you're dealing with other cultures.
There was a hand jumping up and down behind Jacob.
Hey. I just wanted to comment. You know, as a white person working in theater, there's a lot of things I don't know. And here at the bus stop, we recognize that there is a lot of white people that go on stage. And because of that, there's a lot of white people that go in the audience. And I just wanted to comment to recognize that, you know, we do ourselves a disservice by saying that there will be a loss when we neglect audiences who want to hear the stories that we don't put on stage, because we don't empower those people to tell those stories. Not to say that so often in the arts we think that we're poor and there's a loss and there's not enough money. You know, but the reality is, if you look around this room, this is an over-capacity room right now, with people who are really passionate about this story and this topic. Here in Halifax, everywhere. And to say that this story or that putting stories that are not typically seen on stage is going to cause a loss to an artistic, diverse, growing community, I think neglects the fact that it is growing, and that this conversation is a recognition of that. If you build it, man.
Lisa?
Hi, my name is Lisa Coffin. I had an interesting experience of being close to Roy during this whole process, but I don't come from the theatre community, but I'd like to share something from my own experience, having been involved in the contemporary dance community across the country, in all the major cities across the country for the last 30 years. I happened to be living and working in Toronto in the late 80s and early 90s, which was just at the point where the Toronto Arts Council, the Ontario Arts Council, made a radical shift to include, as part of their contemporary arts groups that were eligible for contemporary dance funding, to make a special emphasis for them to accept applicants who were doing contemporary work of Asian background, African backgrounds from all over the world. And it was really interesting. All of the mostly white artists I knew at the time were for it. Yes, we're very radical, we're inclusive and what have. But as soon as they didn't get that grant that they were expected to get, because the money had been spread around in a little different way, when the mandate opened up, people were disgruntled. But it didn't take very long for the art that was created with these small amounts of funding to infiltrate the community, and then people from all sorts of backgrounds started going to, you know, all the different shows that were on. I just want to point out that I think it takes, if there are people who feel that they're underrepresented represented by the arts councils or whomever, foundations, whatever, you have to lobby, you know, the funding bodies. You have to write really articulate arguments why certain things need to shift. I don't necessarily agree with quotas, but whatever, whatever works. People can do performances in alternative venues if they can't afford to rent the cheapest venues in town, like this one, Mirmanati, and for people to just, I don't know, write their stories, but articulate why things need to change, and move in. But just know that you might have some resistance, but I was really happy to see how things shifted really relatively quickly, like within a decade. Anyway.
Thank you.
Can I? Sorry.
Sure, Cory.
I'm just gonna somewhat address that too, Lisa, add on to that. And just, so I'm a member of the Arts in Nova Scotia here. You know, we're constantly looking at things. It's not the responsibility of the marginalized and underrepresented people to come and force the money. It's us as a foundation. We have to continually explore. We have the responsibility. So, you know, it's kind of one of those things. Unfortunately, we always fall into is that people say, well, you need to be louder, or you need to do this, and it's placing where you have to do this, and it's like, no, actually, no, we don't. You do. And being part of the arts, like, you know, as a unit as a whole, we're pretty diverse group, but we also acknowledge it's our responsibility to try to figure out who's being represented from everything from regional to, which is grossly misrepresented across the province. But we can't go to, even if we said regional, we can't go down to, you know, Weymouth and say, you guys need to do more. You need to talk to us more. We've got to go there and we've got to ask. And that's sort of that sort of thing kind of comes back around. So it's not to say that it's wrong, but it is to say that it's not, you know, it's not the responsibility to say, to come and say you can't do this, but we have to, if we're in position, we have to we have to be responsible. If that makes sense.
I'm not sure who's we, but in any case.
The people in a position, like saying, I guess Lisa's saying that you have to go to the councils and you have to lobby. No, it's putting the responsibility on people to get the voices heard. We have to look for it and say we have to be compassionate. Things like these, we have to go out. I'm saying the people that are in a responsible position. I'm only saying that, you know, I'm black, but I'm saying that because on an arts council role, I'm not saying that it's anyone in this audience, you have to come to us. Yes, we want applications and things, but it's our job as a council it's our job to lobby and to look and find.
The councils do, they do work very hard to try and increase access to communities who aren't coming to the table. I think they work here for sure, very hard to do that.
Yeah.
I
guess I'm just making sure everyone's saying, maybe I heard that wrong in that sense that I'm always saying it's being careful, no, but I mean being careful of the whole like putting responsibility on a marginalized group to do, you know, to speak more, to be louder. It doesn't work. Because, and it shouldn't be a priority out of our mouths right away. Because it's really, you know, we're either aggressive or, you know, once we start talking, or, you know, it's like, oh, here we go again, or they find reasons why, you know, it's just like, yeah, it's like, no, that's all I guess I'm saying.
All the hands at once. I think you were first.
My name is Michael, and I'm from away. I need to disclose.
Welcome.
Thank you. And I appreciate that this discussion has become really grounded in the Halifax environment, in the Atlantic Canada environment. This is really helpful for me to hear. I want to talk about three things. I want to talk about tonight. I want to talk about something wonderful. Then I want to talk about something that I find odd. And then I want to talk about something that I'm sad about. So something wonderful is that this is happening. And I hear such a range of diverse voices, almost all speaking with incredible personal passion. Differing degrees of insight or credibility. I'm from away, I can say that. But passion and compassion and room. And I am taking away with me one collective memory in that everybody cares about the existence of theater in Halifax. That's one of the things that I'll carry away from it. And that's to be celebrated, and I feel good about this forum and the participation in the forum, the diversity of voices in the forum. The thing that I find odd, I'll throw myself back 40 years to when I was in university taking a Shakespeare course. And through the entire length of the course, and I had a really good professor teaching me Shakespeare. And I had an ongoing argument with him all the time that Shakespeare didn't write these plays to be read or analyzed or abstractly deconstructed as concept. When he wrote them, most of the population wasn't literate. How they experienced what Shakespeare wrote was in the form of theater. The actual thing happening and an audience responding to it with cheers or with beers thrown at the actors on stage. But that's the crucible where theater lives. And that brings me to the thing that I'm sad about. Because what we're talking about didn't happen. And that's Black Dragon Mountain, which is a play that I happen to think is a fine piece of theater. And so I have a genuine sadness for theater's a really, really hard thing to do. All of you who work in it, my Christ, it takes a lot of resources. Not just money. It takes human resources. It takes technical resources. It takes your just about everything out of your body and your mind and your skills once you jump in and commit to it. It's an enormously difficult thing to do. And the people who committed to this production, thank you. I am.
Okay.
Grateful.
Thanks.
And proud of each and every one of you for doing that. Thank you. That hasn't, I'm not quite finished. That hasn't been
You're
said.
finished soon.
In the variety of stuff that's come, they haven't received the appreciation that I think they deserve. Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. So we had some other hands up. Vivien, you can take a moment to respond.
Yeah, I think maybe I will rehash the Facebook discussion just slightly. I think what I found odd about this play was the fact that the human resources consultant seemed to be severely lacking from the Chinese community. I think that was something that was of a very big concern, and probably, as we've talked about today, like consultation is the first thing, right? And you know, I have no doubt that Black Dragon Mountain has, you know, the greatest intent and probably is a great play in and of itself. But like I said before, you know, to say that, you know, let's say, yeah, Shakespeare wasn't meant to be read, and yet theater, as we know, it's a message that comes to people through, you know, the way you see things, the way you hear things. There are all sorts of latent messages within theater, and that's why those analyses are important, because, you know, think about the way that, you know, I talked about how certain people have to fight to be heard. It's not as if people are just going to be like, no, Vivien, like, I don't understand what you're saying. Like, you know, they're not actively silencing us. These are very latent things within the community. We call them microaggressions. Certain actions, very small things that people say or refer to or dismiss, that, you know, give people that are visible minorities, you know, they just silence them. They don't give them that voice, and that was the biggest problem that I found with this play, was that I didn't hear anybody from the Chinese community that was involved in this play. Actually, I don't even know who in the Chinese community was involved in this play, and I wasn't given that answer, and I was asking for that, and that this discussion is what came out of it, is that we understand now that there needs to be an acknowledgement of the community that this inspiration comes from, that their voices are probably the most important if they have constantly been silenced through history, and that, you know, putting some sort of, you know, saying that something is great doesn't make it great. I'm sure if Black Dragon Mountain was shown, people would know that it was great if it was great. All I came here to do was show that, well, I hope that this play didn't just come from a place of inspiration, but it came from a deep understanding of the problems that come when you are Chinese, when you are Chinese in a Western context. And that is exactly what this play is. It is taking something Chinese, putting it in a Western context, and expecting people to understand it without giving them any sort of way, any sort of ability to actually understand it properly. And that's the problem, is that it's very easily misrepresented, very easily made into a parody, and just, you know, that's a responsibility put on the theater community in the UK.
Megan's hand up.
I think a lot of, a big majority of people in this room are artists, and I don't think anyone here is debating the fact that art isn't important and theater isn't important and putting stories on stage aren't important. And the majority of people in here are doing that because they believe in it. But if we can't value our art before we value other human beings' concerns and other human beings' hearts and other human beings' well-being. So if we're gonna put our art before being humans, what kind of art are we making? And that's not a statement about Roy, that's just a general feeling. If we can't bring in there's been a lot of voices in this discussion being very, very precious about art and not listening to human people's concerns. And yeah, valuing the art over the humanity is just to question that.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, my name is Marjorie. I teach literature. When I teach literature, one of the things we do is look very closely at the literature that we're studying. I think this has been a really fascinating and wonderful and rich discussion, raising so many important issues. The question I have, Vivien, though, and you've been wonderfully eloquent, I have read all your Facebook postings, I'll go and look at them. You talk about the play, but you then talk about the play hypothetically, saying if. Have you read the play?
I have not been given the opportunity to read it.
So the response is to the way in which, and I think very serious issues have been raised about consultation with the community, about the history of Orientalism and stereotyping, about casting. All those issues are vitally important in terms of theater. I guess my feeling is that I was also very moved by, sorry, I can't remember your name, the actress. Sharleen, who spent so long, I gather, learning the part for this play, and came very close to this play. You yourself have experience of being a minority in a dominant white culture. Felt that it was a play that people should see. So I'm just wondering, you said you didn't want this play to be shut down. Jacob said he didn't want this play to be shut down. Is there not a way for this play to move forward through consultation, through, adaptation, workshopping, and then we could all see a revised version of the play, and then we could reconvene and have a fuller, richer discussion?
I think that is something for Roy to take away, and only Roy can really eventually address. It's not really an issue whether everybody in the room might wish to see it. Some of you clearly do and have said so, and some of you not. But I think in terms of the continued development of the play, Vivien was not responding to the play. She was responding to images that were released in the publicity domain, which arguably, they raised concerns because they may have been indistinguishable from images of older, more clearly racist and appropriative kinds of works of white actors dressed and made up to look like Asian characters. And I think we're all on the same page about the history of that kind of representation. And so the discomfort arose from those images echoing the same kind of images in the past. It really isn't about the content of the play that nobody got to see, but it was the launching point for this discussion about how much the Chinese community was involved, which I think we can accurately say not so much.
Correct.
So the future will lead with Roy. We're getting a little late. You haven't spoken?
Yeah.
Sorry, it's hardest to see you guys. Go ahead.
I just want to say that I feel like this is a part of rehashing and learning. I feel like this workshop, I really appreciate the fact that this was set down, and I appreciate the chance for our voices to be heard. It's the biggest thing. I don't understand, what I'm quite upset about is why everybody is defending intent. Intent is one thing, but what it comes off is another. This is a very basic example, but I can hit somebody. And I can say, sorry, I didn't mean to, I'm so sorry, I did not mean to hit you anyway, but the fact of the matter is I still hurt the person. So I acknowledge the fact that I'm sorry that I hit you, I won't do it again. Or at least if I accidentally hit you, I will try to not smack you again. I don't say, I didn't mean to, and I know you're upset, but I really didn't mean to. So when people are defending intent to me, what I'm hearing is, they didn't mean to be mean, but they did, and there's not really much we can do about it. And I would love to see Black Dragon Mountain be rehashed. I would love to see it come back in 6 months, in 2 years, and I would love to see it cropped up again, revitalized with, like we said before, like consulting the Chinese community, consulting more actors, and see it become a representation of my culture, something I can be proud of, something I can be happy to see on stage. Because my initial reaction upon reading the description for the play was, ugh, Orientalism, right? So I'm not saying the play should be shut down, but the fact of the matter is that I don't need to, and I think, I'm not speaking for the Chinese community, but a lot of us don't need to hypothetically see the script to see like what kind of message it can give. The fact of the matter is I've lived it. I already know what kind of effects this kind of thing can give people. But the only way that Asians are portrayed in media is we're kung fu masters, we're math whizzes, we're from the mysterious Orient, and I've seen it all before and I'm sick and tired of it, which is the reason why we're having this workshop right now, which is why we're here discussing it. So when somebody says to me, we didn't mean to be racist and we didn't mean to be, mean-spirited, I definitely don't think this was like that. I don't know if that was not the intent at all, but the fact is the matter as it came off that way. And when people, like when someone sees this play, their first reaction should be, this makes me uncomfortable. It should be, this is a story which I think is respectful and I would like to see.
Sure.
Sorry, what was your name?
Chochi. Sorry,
I just like to say that I did listen. I really want you to know that I feel that I listened.
Yeah.
And
I'm not saying that you
no,
didn't.
I'm not arguing. I just want you to know that I wanted to explain my intent.
Yeah.
But I'm not defending it.
Yeah. No, I'm not saying
I just want you to hear that.
Yes.
That I'm honestly here because Vivien and Abby and other voices that told me something that I hadn't heard.
Yeah.
The play is another issue. What I did with the play, what's inside the play and all that. What I am here for is you and what I didn't know and what I know now. And I just want you to know that I'm trying to listen, and that's why we stopped the play, canceled the play, despite what's inside of it. Whatever beauty may or may not be in there, or whatever junk may be in there. I stopped because I wanted to listen. I just want you to know that whatever else is being said tonight, that's what I'm here.
And I do. I love this workshopping that's happening, which is why I'm here right now. Or else I wouldn't.
Did you want to talk?
Yeah. I think first off, I just wanted to say that I think this is the audience response. I think in a lot of ways this really is the audience responding. I think that there's a lot of talk about the quality of the play, and I think that that's completely irrelevant. Ultimately, I think a lot of this comes down to the question of who gets to tell our stories. I also want to see myself represented, but by whom? I guess I have a question for the white folks here who are involved in theater and television and media, and it's just, why do you think that you are entitled to tell our stories, especially when it has been brought up so many times that we don't have the same access to telling our own stories, and even when we do tell our stories, we don't have the same response, we don't have the same, we don't access the same resources. the public does not support us in the same way. So why do you feel entitled to tell our stories for us? And if you feel that our stories are so beautiful and so worth telling, which they are, then why not instead support us in telling our stories? Why not instead find those of us who are trying to share our stories and who are writing these plays and who are out there like acting and producing these works, and why not take all of the resources that you have more access to because of your white privilege and shift them towards people of color who are already doing this work?
Does anybody want to address that question? No white theater practitioners?
Tron has had her hand up.
Yeah,
for a
she's
while.
had a question.
Okay, sorry, I didn't see.
I would just like to make an louder. I would just like to make an observation. It seems like some of the remarks here have missed the point. It seems to me like the purpose of this conference is to get Vivien's voice heard. Is to respect someone's feeling. It's not about whether the show should be on or off. I feel like some people are not hearing the message, are not getting it. They're not listening. They're just running over us.
I have Chris and then Lisa.
Just quickly, I just think a lot of criticism both online and that has come up a couple times tonight that I think shows how far people have been, some people, not everyone, I think a lot of people have really sincerely attempted to grapple with what a lot of people are calling and saying. But I think some people have missed the mark. And the thing that I think really emphasizes that is, like, if you're saying to us, like, well, have you read the play? Like, the whole fucking point is that no, none of us fucking read the play. Like, that's why we're here. That's the problem. The problem is that some people had access to something, and some of us didn't. Like, that's the whole point. And if you can't take that as a starting point, then then you're not here to listen. Right? Then you haven't heard a single thing that any of the people in this room have said. We didn't read the play. That doesn't say we can't criticize it. That's what we're criticizing. Like, it's mind-boggling to me.
Lisa?
Well, I just put my hand up quickly again to respond to the, sorry I didn't get your name about, just this issue. I really don't think there's ever been a better time for people who feel that they don't have access to public funds to try and meet with people who have them and to educate yourself about how to write grants or whatever. I mean, I don't think there's ever been a better time to put forward projects that have in the past come from communities that haven't been heard. And there are people dedicated in the public sector to trying to facilitate this. I think it's time to stop feeling, it's easy for me to say, but I struggle for the funds. Everybody does. Like, everybody struggles for funding. And everyone has to take responsibility to carve out their piece. And I know the arts councils are really open to new voices coming in now. I just know that that's the case. So call and make appointments. There are people, the officers are there to serve you federally and provincially and municipally. That's what they're there for.
It's a little more complex than that.
Yeah.
It's
Well,
a little more
I
complex than that. Lisa, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. And I'm saying this again. I'm saying this again from being in there. That is just. It's. I apologize. It's almost absurd. We do a lot of work, but there's like you're still putting the onus on the people, saying get up, pull your bootstraps up. It's so complex. You're not in there. You have no clue.
I'm not. I'm on the juries. I see the frustration that people aren't coming to the table. That's my only point of view.
But that's not our
not their
fault.
responsibility.
Like, that's not our fault. That's not our fault as artists or misrepresented communities. It's not our fault.
Well, I'm not laying fault, I'm just saying that people who don't apply are never going to get the money. That's all I'm saying.
Are you trying to say that, Cory, that there needs to be more outreach?
Yes,
To underrepresented.
It's more about the outreach. It's not about the inreach. Like, and that's like that. You know, this whole thing that the councils, like you said, yes, the councils are doing a lot of work, but we're actually we fight against that attitude. But that attitude is what propels the very people we're trying to reach. Like, my own black community is going, you don't give a fuck about us. And we're in there going, no, we need, because they're being, like, it's that type of attitude that just, it's just like it stings, it's a slap, it's a punch, and dare I say, it's extremely ignorant. I'm sorry. Well, no, I'm not. I can't say sorry. I know you're not. I know you're not. We're good friends, by the way.
Let's move on from that particular question. Vivien, you wanted to say something.
You know, actually, I think there's like 3 people that have their hands up for a really long time, so I'm gonna give it to those 2 first. And yeah.
Who's got higher keys?
Oh, thanks. I'm listening as someone who is just peripherally involved in the arts community. I am an educator and I work in the public school system. And we've been asked to take this discussion beyond this particular production. And I'm hearing themes of building capacity and making space accessible to marginalized communities. And nothing is really more accessible than public education, which is where I'm working every day. And over the past few years, I've worked in amazing variety of demographics in the communities of the schools where I've worked in, from the south end of Halifax to very different schools in the north end of Halifax to Fairview Clayton Park. And I've noticed that the artistic kind of enrichment activities that are available to the children and to our developing artists are based on either the capacity of the parents to pay for enrichment programs, the capacity of the school to fundraise for these enrichment programs to make them available to the students whose parents can't, or else the capacity of the administration to develop relationships with volunteers or of the teachers to have enough energy left to volunteer. And there's a huge variation in which schools have which activities available to which students. So if we're talking about building capacity, this is not just limited to the arts community. The whole city of Halifax is still living out the legacy of the forced evacuation of an entire community. Issues of racism are very, very real in just the everyday life of our city, and not only in the arts community. So if we're talking about building capacity, I think that it's very important to not only focus on the professional arts, because you were in school once, and you were a student once, and somebody inspired you once. And maybe it was a teacher, maybe it was a volunteer, maybe it was a paid program person brought in for a specific project. But these things are also worthy of our attention.
Thank you. Vivien said there were more hands up, just a little bit higher because of Megan's hair bun there. Thank you, in the back.
Hi, my name's Bill. I inappropriately clapped at the beginning of this event. I want to apologize for that. This is a difficult issue because this show was a comedy, and I am a comedian, and so the inappropriateness I felt of the person's position and the statements that they made surprised me, and my reaction was one of humorousness. So that's why I applauded. Is Devin here? Devin was the worst one on the Facebook groups. I don't think he was the rudest. So yeah, I'm not him. That's why. That was not my clap intended. It was just, wow, surprise. As a privileged white dude, I could be taller, but other than that, and straight. But other than that, the difficult thing that I feel that the role of the sort of the white people in the room is to just sit and listen, that's it. Well, try, help, remove microaggressions, but like this is a place of hearing voices that aren't heard, and it can get really tough because I hear you, and then I emotionally react, and you emotionally react, and obviously that's not enough to fix the years of not being heard. So there's a lot of just sitting and continuing to hear, and so for anyone sort of thinking, I've heard this, that's your main job, is to sit and hear. Is anyone pissed off at that?
Yep, thanks, Bill. Jacob's hand is up, and then the woman in front.
The last comment. I just want to respond to the comment earlier about who gets to tell our stories. I come from a situation where, in my community personally, in Black Nova Scotia, I've worked with artists of many diverse backgrounds, but there's a staunch divide in our city. A staunch divide. For example, I see faces in this room that I've never met. I don't know very many people from the Chinese community here in Halifax. I'd like to get to know my Chinese brothers and sisters, but we all feel there's this divide where I don't know if I should go over and say hello because I might not be well. Hey, how are you? The same thing. I don't know if I should go say hello to the giant, scary, bearded Pac-Man because I don't know if he's going to be too welcoming to that. So there's that staunch divide, and I think if we get to a point where it's who gets to tell whose stories, like if only me as a Black person can tell Black stories. There's a book out there of a gentleman who's from this province who was a world-class athlete, and that book was written by a white individual. However, with a huge amount of collaboration from my community, and yet he still faces, and I've been with him in these situations where, what gives you the right to tell my story? And my response to it is, if this gentleman, in a gracious and giving way, and he was, because I know him, did not tell this story, were you going to do it?
Yeah.
And I've asked that question to, but wait now. I've asked that question to my community. Were you going to do it? Now, again, he collaborated. I've written a play based on this book. That's the reason my play exists, because I read this book. And when I asked him, can I use some materials from the book, he graciously offered it to me free of charge. Every word in the book, if I want, I can use. Again, that's the point of collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. I truly believe that if only, I'm going to say my bad, my brothers, if only Black people in this province, told Black stories, they would not get told, period. Because we're afraid, because we don't have resources, because. And yeah, fine. I just, in response to who gets to tell those stories, we need to tell them together. And yes, you need to be involved. You have to be involved. And you have to be involved in a major capacity in every step of the process. But I'd love to be able to maybe someday write a character of Chinese descent with the gracious, open spirit that I hope I can have to accept what my brothers and sisters of Chinese descent have to say. But we have to be able to collaborate, and this divide exists. This staunch divide that only I can tell my story and I get it, because I have ownership of my story, and I want that, and I want to control it. But working in a community that's not diverse, it's not diverse, I need to reach out to I need your help. And I have to have the ability to, and the humility to say, I'm sorry, I need your help. But you have to have me. If you want to tell this story, you have to have me in every single step of the way. That's the last time I speak.
Just want to say you might not be as scary as you think you are. All right, one more. Yeah.
Okay, so pretty much like, if there's anything I want everybody in this room to hear, is that personally, I invite everyone to collaborate. We want you to work with us, not for us, and not over us.
I don't want to leave your question unanswered, and I guess I might have to be the white guy in the room to have a go.
Great.
I'm an appropriator. In the broadest sense of the word, in the way that I learned about it in the 80s, it's a pretty constant thing in what I do. And sometimes I have gone so far as to write stories that took place in several communities, but it did in fact go to those communities and ask permissions and collaborate with people in those communities in Africa, in Asia. I think that as far as your question as to why people feel like they have the power to tell other people's stories, I don't think that that's what artists necessarily think they're doing. I think when I write a diverse group of characters in a story, what I'm trying to do is to be inclusive, to, as a writer, have a point of view, but not a point of view that shuts out other people. And that goes from the writing process to the directing and the casting process of being able to write parts that I don't know exactly who that's going to be on the page, but to really actually allow the best actors to walk in the room and tell me who the characters are, more than I necessarily could as a writer. Because actors really do bring, more than anyone credits them for, to the stage and the screen. So it's a fine line, I think, that people cross sometimes without realizing that we're doing it, when we are trying to be inclusive and instead we borrow without permission. It happens a lot, I think, and I know that I've done it. But what I'm hearing tonight, I think, really does give me a better perspective and the knowledge that the right road is always to make the approach, to make the connection, to seek collaboration, and even permissions. So that's my answer, as best as I could do.
So just on time, so Thom had done, for some of you may not know, Thom had done an adaptation of a play that took place in our Black community. He directed the show, and I found actually, it was successful in a sense that you were curious as a director. You directed us as you just listened. You were interested in the actual story, in the situation, in the humans. You didn't, and mostly in just being human as a human being, as like you said. And that is sometimes the difference of being a Black actor, and being told like the same Jake, when all of a sudden I show up and I'm this Jamaican guy in a button, but he's like, you need a better accent. This guy comes over in a golf cart, he's like, you need a better accent, you need more Jamaican-y. And I'm just like, oh my God. So there's a difference between, when you're going into a community, you're very careful, you're very genuine about it, and you're just listening, and in turn you're watching, and you're a part of that, and that's where it becomes successful, and that's where we're just telling the story, and that's where it becomes successful, and it's a hard place to get to on both ends, but that worked, I thought. So yeah.
Sometimes to speak to that situation, that was a play written by an African Nova Scotian writer with a largely Black cast, and it's arguable whether, in fact, the doors of financing would have been open if I wasn't the one asking. I think that's a reality of the situation. So, I'm looking at that with a lot of hindsight to put words to that reality. it may have been more successful with a different director. In any case, it's getting late. Does anybody have something else to add to our conversation tonight? Did anyone have their hands up that I missed? I'll stand up to see. Okay. We're all here, and so this will wrap up the sort of formal part of our discussion. People can mill about. What I hear and what I'm taking away is that there's a lot to be said for mentorship, for the idea of, if not, maybe quotas, or maybe setting aside some kind of funding that is specific with regards to mentorship and minority cultural communities. And of course, the most important thing of all is it's not necessarily about research, it's about asking and fully receiving input, cooperation, and actual creative participation from the communities that as artists we wish to work with. All of those things I think were loud and clear, and much more. So thank you everybody for leading us. And thank you all too very much.
Thank you, Thom. Thanks very much. Good job.